Hello, today is Saturday, August the 4th, 1990. My name is John and I'm an alcoholic. I invite you to listen to the 41st Virginia Area Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's 50 golden years of AA in Arlington, Virginia. I thank you and I hope you enjoy this tape.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Barton. I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to the 41st Virginia Area Convention. We're celebrating 50 years of sobriety in the Commonwealth. Before we get started, just a few announcements.
I am Dottie Rapp, and I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic. Hi. I would like to read the preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. I have asked two of our early timers here in Virginia. Hi, I'm still Dottie Rapp, an alcoholic. And I'm really glad to be here. This way I had no idea that the room was going to fill up this much. This is almost like Seattle. I feel very pleased and honored, and I'm not just saying this to fill up time, that I happen to have been accorded the pleasure and privilege of working on archives at this particular time. I hope that all of you will visit our display. We have put the booklet together. We hope to do another one in much greater depth. But this is a very special time for AA. As you know, we have just celebrated 55 years of AA as a whole, and we are celebrating 50 years of AA in Virginia. And it is a time when we still have with us a very few of the early timers who were there when Dr. Bobbin and Bill W. got together and AA had its start. And we also have a few more who are well acquainted with those early timers, but we're losing them very, very fast. And it is really our responsibility, and again, our pleasure and privilege, to be able to record these old timers and to receive the records and all these interesting programs and so forth that they participated in St. Louis and all this kind of thing, and the early on activities in Virginia. And I was thinking today, it's kind of like the history of our country where Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, as many of you know, both died together on the same day when United States, was exactly 50 years old in 1826. And that was kind of the turning point. The founding fathers were gone. And I feel it's that way in AA, so it is a real pleasure. I am lucky. It's like being program chairman for your home group, that you can choose the people that you like to hear, and that's what happened to me at this convention. I got to choose the person that I wanted, and I don't know how some of you all feel, but there are certain people in this program who, when we talk to them on the phone, many people we talk to are kind of sad and they're always having trouble, and that's okay because we listen. But there are some people who make us feel very upbeat and good when we finish talking with them. And one of these people is our speaker this afternoon. And I am very lucky. I met Frank first at the General Service Conference I attended in 81 and 82. And one of the most interesting things, I think, is that most people transport themselves around Manhattan either in taxis or on that subway, or they walk or whatever. But Frank goes all over the city on a bicycle. And if you see it chained up in front of that, that's Frank, which I think is great. And I have had the pleasure of working with Frank, who is the archivist, who succeeded Bill's friend Nell Wing. And I am going to turn it over now because he is a good speaker, and you're going to like him. Frank.
Bless you. Thanks, Hi, everybody. My name's Frank. I'm an alcoholic, and nice to be in your company. And I appreciate those words, Dottie. I hope you notice I smiled from time to time while I was waiting to go on. One time somebody said, "My God, Frank, it looks like you're going to a hanging when you're waiting to go on." Certainly not a program of attraction. Also, I was in one of those moods, what am I going to say, and my God, and all that. Everything leaves you, as you all have this experience as soon as your time comes. And someone slipped me a note anonymously, I'll never forget it, and it had the secret. And the first part of the secret was begin where you are. Number 2 was do what you can gracefully. The third was step out in faith. And the fourth, which I love, was expect God to help. So I expect God to help with this. I'm going to tell a little bit about my story, how I got in your company, not unlike yourselves, by being a pig. I thought I had a lot of elegance when I drank. I thought I had a lot of class. I don't know where I got that ancient memory, but I believe that. That was hard for me to get clear on, that I wasn't, that I was a slob. I came out of the womb lying. I came out of the womb in the sense of changing reality, repackaging. I'm a wonderful repackager, redoing reality in an acceptable way, leaving out big elements of the truth, weaving part of the truth into a tapestry, leading you to conclude things are true that aren't. And that's the way I lied. I rarely told an outright lie that black was white, but that's basically what I did. I came into a family that I felt was crushed by life. There was no spirit. And I think that's probably the worst environment to come into, one that you perceive to be spiritually barren. My mother's manic depressive. I was born in Central Islip. For those of you from Long Island, Central Islip State Hospital. So, I wasn't really wrapped from the beginning. And my father had left that reality before I was born. So I really see that, like the Bible says, the sins of the sons and daughters are visited on. The sins of the fathers and mothers are visited on the sons and daughters, because that's my generic inheritance. That's my emotional legacy. The way I deal with things, either I'm manic depressive about them. I describe myself as somebody with a foot on the brake and the accelerator in the same moment. I desperately want to go someplace fast, and yet I'm afraid to death of moving. Or I describe myself as being on fast forward or off. Either I'm in an obsession, I'm going to find that blue shirt on 9 o'clock on a Saturday, or I'm in bed waiting for the next obsession. That kind of personality. And that's what I tried to treat with alcohol. I was the kind of kid in class, I desperately wanted attention. I was a competitive person who couldn't compete. I fell apart. I didn't have emotional stamina, as my family didn't have emotional stamina. They had other gifts, but they didn't have that. They couldn't go for the brass ring, and I desperately wanted to go for the brass ring. I wanted to excel, and I couldn't. I lacked the it, whatever it was, and that's what I sought in alcohol. And that's what I got. A long time of my drinking, I was able to get it. The missing ingredient. A friend of mine, and I don't know if he was in your panel, but Willard from Texas, a former delegate, when he speaks, he says, "My name is Willard, I'm an alcoholic, and if I hadn't become an alcoholic, I wouldn't have become anything at all." And when he said that, I loved Willard, and we were soulmates, because had I not become an alcoholic, I wouldn't have become anything at all. I probably would have suicided, because I've always had an ideation for suicide. I always could imagine myself not being. What I needed was a powerful tool to get a positive imagination. You know, I'm the kind of person, I have a powerful imagination, as I say, but I imagine everything wrong. You know, when I was a kid, I never imagined I was going to win the lottery or I was going to do well at school. I always imagined the air conditioner was going to fall on me from the 12th floor, you know, or I was going to be hit by a car or a horse in New York. You know, statistically, your chances of being hit by a horse. But I once saw a horse hit a bus, and he bled orange blood. And that was a memory that I couldn't get out of my mind. And interesting enough, I was raised by my aunt, my mother's sister, and she had lost 2 children. One was she had 4 children in all. One was retarded. You know, she's about 60-something years old now, and she thinks she's 7. One of her sons died under a cab in front of her eyes, run over in front of her cab and killed. And the other died in her arms of diphtheria before they had antibiotics. And the other daughter hated her. So, I mean, that was 4 out of 4. And I was given to her, and it was like a manna from heaven, you know. So I had that kind of attention, and I knew it. I knew I had access to power from her. You know, I drank for power. I used people for power because I didn't have any myself. You know, my access to power was alcohol. Alcohol was my largest single encounter with power in my life. With a drink in my hands, I could say yes to life. With a drink in my hands, I thought you wanted to hear me, and hear me, and hear me. You know, I had a lot to say when I was drinking. You know, I was barren. I was speechless when I wasn't drinking. If we met on the street, the first thing I'd say to you was, "Let's have a drink." And like Pavlov's dog, you know, when you rang the little bell, it would start to salivate. The fact that we were going to have a drink would calm me enough that I could begin the social exchange. You know, that we could have that. Before I drank, I was so flooded with dread about life in general. You know, I went to Catholic schools, by the way, for 16 years, and they smell fear in Catholic schools. You know, I always, as I said, I was enormously competitive, and I did very well at things like mathematics. You know, when you could get the answer out before they finished the question, I loved that. You know, they were startled, and I was startled. But that I could use that neurotic energy to do that. But if I had to stand up and recite French, I fell apart. You know, I knew I was going to make a mistake as soon as I stood up, and I did. And when I was corrected on my feet, as people do, teachers do, I got worse rather than better. You know, I got further away from the accurate pronunciation. So I lived in that kind of dread, you know, that kind of fear, overwhelmingly. I would do anything. I love the alcoholic expression. You know, I'd rather die than be embarrassed. And that was true for me. I'd rather be dead than embarrassed. My pride is my biggest sin because shame is my most powerful emotion. You know, I just hated to be shamed. So consequently, Freud said a fear is a wish. So during my adolescence, I got lots of occasions to be ashamed. I was ashamed of my family. I was ashamed of who I was. You know, I could always change who I was by lying, by creating this other reality or repackaging. You know, I knew how to package myself. I just never knew how to be myself. You know, I knew where to get the right haircuts. I knew where to get the accoutrements of a person. I even read The New Yorker from the age of 7 every week. I would use words wrongly. I mean, I couldn't pronounce them. I knew what they meant, but I couldn't pronounce the words because I'd never heard them spoken. I just read them. And so people wouldn't know what I was saying half the time. they could sense I cared about it, but they wouldn't be able to get it a lot. And if I were corrected, I'd be humiliated. I would not. I'd become silent. Anyway, that was the kind of personality that sought to drink. With a drink in my hand, I could be corrected. I drank not to care. Sadly, short of a blackout, I always cared. So really what I drank to be was unconscious. I didn't know that. But anyone who watched me drink, they would say, that man wants unconscious time. That man doesn't want to experience his five senses. Because if I was drinking this drink, I really had my eye on the next one. A woman in my group said her favorite drink was the next one. And I loved her, because that's the way I was. I'd already had this one. I was really getting the next one. I never liked to finish a drink. If you came to my house, I'd have a drink in your hand before you had your galoshes off. And a drink, A vase wouldn't be big enough for me to do. I love huge glasses. I still have huge glasses. I love the big gulp things. That's the way I drank. And we would always freshen them up. We would never get another drink. That sounds vulgar. You would just sort of freshen up this thing. And a couple of them you were in unconscious time, or I was. Now, I was in blackouts from the beginning. I was comfortable in blackouts. In fact, I always think it's ironic they ask the alcoholic to tell their story. I thought that's kind of a dealing in fantasy here. A neighbor knows more critical material just watching the window, more details about my drinking than I did. I always liked the fact that they asked us what happened. Why were you driving out the exit of a freeway was a favorite. Like you knew. Or where were you going? My favorite was one time after an after-hours place in New York. I was headed vividly. You know how you are. You capture moments when you're in a blackout clearly, and you can't tell how far apart these moments are, but they're powerfully clear. And I remember the light was green. I was heading west on 14th Street. The next thing I knew, I was on the sidewalk. The top was down. No seatbelts, with somebody I'd picked up at the airport hours before, drunk, of course. And we were sitting on the sidewalk in this car, 4 flat tires facing east. And people were asking me what happened. Fortunately, I kept my mouth shut that time. I used to jump out of blackouts talking, but that time I kept my mouth shut, and somebody said, "What happened?" Well, this guy was coming down 2nd Avenue, hit the back of his car, he spun around and landed, and I had my story. And I bet we all know those kinds of gifts from God when somebody else gave us the story. I had lots of those, lots of deliverances. I was a drunken driver. You couldn't take the car keys away from me. I was telling my new friend Scott, I was telling him that I lived in California, and in New York you can get around without driving. I took a bicycle, even drinking, and I would take I was bolder when I drank, of course, as most of us are. I would take the transverses when I drank. I don't take the transverses sober. But the cars hurtle through there on the crossbound streets between the two sides, east and west side of Central Park. And I would take those, and I would have lots of suits with the right arm ripped off or frayed, or a cab driver would deliver my attaché case, a couple of days later, that had been run over a lot of times by a bus or something. That's the way I lived. I fell in. We self-select when we're drinking. We find other people like ourselves, just like we self-select in AA. And I found lots of people who drank the way I did. If I went to your house and you produced jiggers, I would say, God, it's going to be a long night. Sort of one for you and one for me, and then put everything back. By the time they sat down, I'd chewed the ice and started on the glassware. I was horrendously thirsty drinker. Judy Garland said she had a thirst. I identified with that. I had no thermostat. People so-called normal drinkers, they'll say things like, "I've had enough." Those words have never come out of my mouth. People have screamed it on my behalf. He's had enough. But I never felt it. I never felt it. Or people don't even notice that they have a glass of wine at their meal. You know, if you're in a restaurant, you notice people, and the wine's all poured, and there's a couple of people not drinking at all. I can't take my eyes off it. You know, I'm fascinated, riveted. It's like the person next to you who orders a drink in the plane. You know, you're going nonstop coast to coast, and they stir a drink to death, but they don't drink it. And I can't look out the window. I can't read my magazine. I'm fascinated with this ritual of stirring a drink. I never stirred a drink in my life. I couldn't get enough. As I say, I was drinking for unconscious time. I was drinking to get a place I couldn't get to without a large quantity of alcohol. And I have to remind myself of that. You know, a friend of mine spoke at the International Convention in Seattle, and he said, Don P., some of you might know him, former trustee, and I loved what he said. Yeah, I see heads nodding. He said, we're not human beings trying to have a spiritual experience in AA. We're spiritual beings trying to get through a human experience in AA. And I drank to get through human experiences. Because, as I said, I didn't have the emotional stamina myself to get through them. I couldn't. I had to have unlimited access to alcohol to get through anything. And as we know, as the thing progresses, you can't do anything without a drink. And that's the way it was for me. I'm a classic study in Alcoholism 101. You know, I couldn't get my hands on much alcohol until the Army. And I went in the Army in January of 1957, and I drank daily until I got to AA. And when I say I drank daily because, as I say, I never measured a drink. The only thing in the beginning that could distract me from drinking were other more powerful drives in my life. Sex could distract me for a little while. I'd put down a glass or whatever. Or the pursuit of money or peace or people's affection. I had lots of drives in life. I wanted to be popular. I describe myself as somebody running for public office with the postman. You know, everybody had to admire me, that kind of neuroses. And I wanted a lot of achievement. I wanted the approval of people. I wanted to gather a lot of money. I wanted to have power. You know, alcohol triumphed over every other drive in my life. If you're an alcoholic and you drink, alcohol triumphs over everything else in your life. I didn't have any money left. I had humiliated myself in front of everyone on the planet, particularly those who cared about me. You know, each man kills the thing he loves, Oscar Wilde wrote. And I would push people away the most violently who cared about me the most. As I say, I was a drunken driver. People would plead with me. Stop it. Please don't do it. I had a Yamaha in California. And I don't know why. I bought it from a guy who had 6 children, and he fell off it twice, and his wife made him get rid of it. And I bought it, and I must have fallen off it a half a dozen times. In fact, I remembered I would be so paralyzed that when it stopped, I would know that I should put my foot down, but I couldn't. You know, so it would kind of quietly tip over. And yet I wasn't out of it. I could watch people watch me tip over. Humiliating. You know, the only thing worse than being an alcoholic is to watch people watch you be an alcoholic. You know, watch you be the fool. Something I never wanted to be, the fool. You know, and I'd become the fool. You know, if you drink and you're an alcoholic, you become what you hate the most. I became crude, vulgar. A friend of mine reminds myself, and this is very true, that we've come a long way in AA. I've come a long way in AA. Collectively, we've come a long way. We can fill fancy hotels in beautiful parts of the planet, filled with fresh flowers, and everybody looking young and attractive. And by the way, you're a very good-looking crowd here. I see others share that. I heard that once in Roanoke. This is my second, by the way, Virginia convention. I was in Roanoke some years ago, and a man, he said that. He said, you were a good-looking crowd. I never forgot it, and I use it a lot. He said, you're a good-looking crowd, and I would have liked to have had a drink with each of you. You know? I said, no, I like the way that man thinks. You know? Anyway, if you're an alcoholic, you become what you hate the most. You know, the crude, vulgar, threatening. A friend of mine calls it sometimes in AA we can forget about the blood, the mud, and the vomit. You know, that I've urinated all over myself in some of the prettiest hotels on the planet. You know, I had a particular thing. I was like a moth who wouldn't leave the flame alone. You know, when I was in the most explosive situations or the most sensitive situations, I'd be the most out of control. We had an industry dinner party, annual Christmas dinner party at the Waldorf Astoria. Everybody in the industry, I worked for the pharmaceutical industry in the advertising departments, or advertising agencies for a while. I worked on that side. But God and everybody would be in that room. Every chief executive officer, every president, everybody. And that's when I'd be most out of control. I would be drunk before I could go to it. You know, when you have to drink to go drinking, you're in big trouble. You know, I had to be drunk to go to your house to drink, or the Waldorf Astoria. And then I'd tell everybody off, or I'd run away with the elevator, something cute, you know. And people would take me down and put me in a cab and send me home. And I'd go back, and I'd go back, and I'd go back. Just couldn't stop it. Just couldn't stop it. You know, when 4 times a year we would go out to tell the salesmen about our programs, our upcoming advertising programs, and so everybody would be traveling along, all the executives, and they tried putting me on late in the afternoon, they tried putting me on early in the morning, they tried letting other people do my slides, because a favorite would be I'd upset the slides, 10 minutes before, because I'd be so hungover and nervous. So they tried everything to accommodate me, and yet I'd still be the most drunk person in the room from the night before, or from lunch, or from whatever, that I would be embarrassing, in front of 800 salesmen. That's my alcoholism, and that's what I have to remind myself. Alcohol is a powerful master. It just wants everything from us. Somehow, those of us who are alcoholic in the room survive that. I just like to remind myself of that. Somehow I survived my own hand. If anyone watched me drink, they would say that man wants unconscious time, as I said. They would also say he wants to extinguish his life. He doesn't want to feel his 5 senses. He wants to die on a daily basis. I was into high-risk games. I smoked and I drove, had fires in the apartment, and I was saved from all of them. And one day, I found myself on those chairs in Alcoholics Anonymous. By the way, I came in June, which is the month that you started here in Virginia, June 5th. I came in AA on June 10th. With years later, I found out it was Dr. Bob's anniversary and our collective anniversary. But I came in June 10th of 1970. And June is the best month to come to AA. You stick to the chairs in June. Those metal chairs. If you're a sweater like I am, I sweat under ideal conditions, but when I drank, it was the only way my body could detoxify itself, or try to, because I had an impaired liver, I had impaired kidney function, I was distended liver, I was yellow, but I sweated like crazy. If I moved my hand, there'd be enough water, fluid, to sustain life. That kind of thing, or dripping anywhere and everywhere. I would kind of sweat in January. I don't know, I could never hold on to overcoats or raincoats. I wonder what happens. I sometimes muse what happens to all the overcoats and raincoats alcoholics lose in a year. You know, where do they all end up? Or I sometimes would come home with an overcoat like that or something. And try to look cool getting back in my building, you know, about 9:15 in the morning when everybody's going this way. I'm trying to go that way to go clean up and get to work, you know, to go up. That kind of stuff. Anyway, as I say, I was alive at the end of my drinking. A friend of mine says, Frank, every alcoholic stops drinking. It's nice to be alive when you stop. You know? And AA isn't about not drinking. A lot of us hear from our friends outside that AA is about not drinking. You know, I didn't need AA not to drink. That was a gift of God. I just couldn't get another teacup of booze down me. You know, what I needed AA for was to live a life that I never wanted to live. You know, yet I thought when I drank I was living. I thought I was going for the brass ring. But what I was doing was going for unconscious time. And in one moment, I was in a program designed to increase consciousness. Now, if that isn't tough on your central nervous system, you know, from trying to hide most of your life into showing up for most of your life and noticing most of your life, you know, and experiencing most of your life. You know, it's crazy. I often wonder why so many of us don't stay around. You know, the miracle, however, is that any of us do. You know, because it's an enormously stressful thing getting sober. I needed a program for my recovery, not for my acute alcoholism. I needed a program to survive a recovery. Because suddenly I had 5 senses reporting 100% of the data to me. And I was in overflow. You know, for somebody who never wanted to have an emotional experience in his life, you know, I was left hemisphere oriented. I wanted to be cerebral. I wanted to be rational. A friend of mine in our group calls herself a militant rationalist. You know, we wanted to be unemotional, you know, and really on top of it. What we wanted was control, if you're like me. You know, because if you run life like a laboratory, it's predictable. But life for me is not predictable. You know, something happens and your life is importantly changed in one moment. And that kind of stuff I couldn't deal with. You know, that's why I was a daily drinker who got into binges. I mean, I would just get out of control because I couldn't control life. You know, any small thing happened to me, I was pushed over the edge into uncontrollable drinking, blackout drinking, where I just couldn't work, I couldn't function. I came to AA, I hadn't worked for a year. And my job was the biggest thing about me. If you asked me anything about myself, I would sound like my job resume. Because that's how I describe myself. I worked for, I did, I accumulated these things. You know, if you don't believe in yourself, you've got to use surrogates to describe yourself. Material things. And that's what I did as long as I could. But my alcoholism, I lost a lot of the things I used to describe myself. So I really ended up on those chairs with nothing to describe myself. Which is the best way to enter AA, I think, is to have no distractions left. You know, I describe myself, my alcoholism was violent enough to propel me into those chairs that I stuck to them. My body juices just adhered me to those chairs. Like if you took a bug with enough velocity against that wall, the bug would adhere to the wall. So I wasn't adhering to AA out of any nobility or for any kind of need for holiness. I was just stuck. I had nowhere to go. You know, and I was, and one day I have a particular affection for inner groups. Wherever we enter, AA is a holy place. And I entered AA through New York Inner Group. Into my consciousness came to call AA one moment, and I acted on that impulse. To get those two things in the same moment is very rare. To get an impulse to do something about my drinking and to do it just came together in that moment, about 10 o'clock on that June 10th day. And I got a woman, Mary Ellen, on the phone, at Intergroup, and she said, "You have to come down here." And I went down there because I thought that's what you had to do. And it was in a loft building on 22nd Street, and there were beer cans in the hall. And I was all dressed. And in those days, I got a haircut every 10 days, a razor cut. My secretary at one time thought I had a toupee because I could be in a hurricane and nothing ever moved, you know. And that's the way I went down to my first encounter with AA. Endematous, with an extended liver, but trying to look like I was okay. You know, try to look like I could get a job that day, you know. In fact, I had a dinner appointment with a president of a small drug company that night. He and his wife stood by me. And I stayed at AA all day. I've been in AA custody ever since. They sent out for sandwiches. They sent out for cigarettes. I just wanted a beer. Because like most of us, I thought if you were drinking beer, you were giving your liver a rest. You know, it didn't even count beer. Someone told me there were nutrients in beer, you know, vitamin Bs. So I would imagine all these happy little vitamins coursing through my body when I got to the beer. Anyway, they didn't send out for beer, and they kept me there. And they even persuaded me to call those people and tell them that I wasn't going to come for dinner that night, which was very hard for me to do because I sensed that they counted on me. And when I finally called them and told them where I was, they were elated and relieved. They just felt that that they were my last contact with anybody, and they were reluctant to cut it. And is it time? I hurry this along here. I've been in AA ever since. And I came in with the kind of frame of mind that I didn't want to live in an AA ghetto. You know, I didn't want to go to AA coffee shops and have AA coffee with AA people and eat AA cookies and talk like God, as I understand him. You know, stuff made me crazy. I desperately wanted to be different, you know, to be distinctive. My whole life was a propulsion to do that. And yet I suffered enormously by being different. You know, I describe myself as somebody, a loner with the herd instinct, you know, desperately getting myself away and then wanting to be with all the other people, you know, that kind of stuff. Man against himself. Enormous conflicts at the subconscious level. And that still persists if I'm not conscious and if I'm not using spiritual tools. I can talk to anybody in the room except somebody I'm interested in. You know, soon as any kind of emotional contact comes, I get clumsy and I run. Even at AA Christmas parties, you know, and I'm sober many years now, I'll eat the celery in the first 2 minutes, you know, out of sheer clumsiness, stupidity, and then have to deal with the strings in my teeth, you know, and look cool. You know, doing one of those where you try to think of something to say without saying the same jerky thing I said last year and the year before. That kind of personality is what I tried to treat with massive amounts of alcohol and pills. As I say, I worked for the pharmaceutical industry, so I had unlimited access to pills. All I did was have to ask. And I never took little, you know, samples. I wanted trade packages, bottles of 100 or 500. And I never met a pill I didn't like, any more than I met a drink I didn't drink. You know, I took diuretics because I didn't want to look like a drunk. I didn't want to be bloated. I took Orvolfia serpentina because my heart pounded. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And my heart would pound so much my bed would vibrate. You know, and I took all these so-called minor tranquilizers because for some unaccountable reason, you take massive amounts of a known sedative and you're more nervous. A nervous person becomes more nervous. I don't know why that is, but that's the reality of it. And of course I needed Ritalin. I met a SIBA man at a party one time to see how much trouble he was in. When I met him, we were both at the bar, of course, and he said, you know, Frank, Ritalin's postponed blackouts. So I was never to go forth another evening without a little nibble or two on Ritalin, because you got another half hour of conscious time before you slipped under. You know, maybe you were you were noticing things at 9:45 or 9:45 rather than 8:30 or 7:30. Anyway, that's the kind of thing. And I didn't convulse after I entered AA. I'd had at least 2 other convulsions in the presence of physicians. I was a convulser, little party trick I had. People would say, "Get him another drink." And that's the way they treated me. And it worked. But anyway, after AA, I just say that to remind myself of the power in this room. It has not been necessary for me to drink or use a pill. I stopped pills on the same day. And I didn't know why. I just did it. I thought you had to. When I came into AA, I didn't think the drinking was negotiable. I thought you had to stop. I didn't hear about slips until I'd been sober a year. I just didn't hear about them. I thought of hanging myself on a daily basis. I thought that was a way you went for unconscious time. You really played the ace. No use peeing all over yourself and vomiting when you can really play the ace and go for it if you want to get out. And I went back into analysis after 4.5 years because I didn't think wanting to hang yourself on a daily basis was a testimony for mental health. I went for analysis about a summer. By that time, I came into AA enormously in debt. I had the capacity to borrow a lot of money when I drank. People believed in me and loaned me money. Sober, they could smell my fear and they wouldn't give me anything. So I didn't bankrupt. I paid off the money. So about 4.5 years into AA, I'd begun to work again. I'd begun to be able to do flow chart sheets and start paying off the money. I owed $53,000. By 4.5 years, I began to see the end of that, or see some catching up here. And I was in analysis twice a week, and it was $75. That was cheap. It tells you how long ago it was. $25 a week, and I could only pay him $50, so I was slipping into debt another $100 a week. I went crazy after about 4 months. Didn't bother him, bothered me. And I just said, well, if I have to live with the thought of hanging myself the rest of my life, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to go into any more debt. I can think about hanging, but I won't hang. Just the same as a lot of people in AA could think about drinking, and they didn't drink. And I believe that change in my thinking was the 6th step. I just became entirely ready to have God deal with it. I just felt in my soul I couldn't buy my way out of it again. I had always bought my way out of stuff. Money was an enormous power for me. I bought your affection with money. I bought release, or I bought a lifestyle and an attitude, and I bought power over my family. All of that was centered in money because from a kid, I always could use money. I knew how money worked. I could use small amounts of money for leverage and get lots of things. I would squirrel it away and use it as a power to get what I wanted. Finally, in that 4.5 years, I gave money up. I said, if I have to live with this thing, I can't buy change. I'm going to have to just experience it. And money went out of my life. Since that moment, money has not been a big factor in my life. By 7 years in AA, I was debt-free. And that was an incredible miracle for me. Because money, someone early on in AA said, everybody has a God in their life. I came into AA, and I squirmed when you mentioned God. I would say, to myself, of course, being a people pleaser, I would say, why don't they do that at home? Talk about God. I was much more comfortable talking about venereal diseases, syphilis, or whatever. Anything, those abstractions were fine with me, but God hurt. We resist what we need the most, if you're like me. And I was enormously left hemisphere, denying I had any problems with spirituality or whatever, and I was barren spiritually. And that's been the biggest gift, of course. Physical recovery comes fast and easy to us. In a year, I'd never looked better in my life. I was jogging. I finished a New York marathon, things I'd never even thought about doing, except fantasies maybe in bars or whatever. So I got physically better quickly, and mentally too. I could scheme even better, sober, because I could stay focused on a thing longer. But my emotional life, my spiritual life was barren for a long time because I couldn't feel anything. And I thought faith was a feeling. Like you drank for feeling, you drank for confidence. I thought that's what you had to go for. And I'd never felt the presence of God. And pretty soon I learned that faith was the ability to act in the face of doubt. And that my just staying sober another day began to build an enormous amount of faith and trust. And to see the miracles around me, to see other people getting sober. Because I didn't see myself. I was always critical. I'd always had voices living in my head, always criticizing me, always judging me harshly. I wasn't as good as, I wasn't as honest as. I always questioned my own motives. Because I always have a motive behind another one. That kind of neuroses. Anyway, I just began to get better in spite of myself. And I began to get into prayer. I began to get into meditation, which whether I like it or not, whether I rail about it or not, the only two ways I have to deal with stress in my life today is prayer and meditation, period. I can't use people. I can't even use AA meetings anymore the way I once could. I used AA meetings to feel better. Now I don't know about your area, but you can go to an AA meeting and they're a group depression meeting. You can go on a sun-filled October day, fresh from buying a nice shirt at Bloomingdale's, going to the big dance that night, and in 20 minutes, there's no reason to go on. We're never going to get better. You sort of need a meeting to get over the meeting. Somehow in the years I've been in AA, we've gone from a lot of open meetings where people just shared the miracle and got off into where we share a day in the life of, And you get 14 bad days in a row, and your own day doesn't look so good. Anyway, that's been an enormous change for me to have access to God. I drank to have access to power, and today through prayer and meditation, I have access to power. It may not come on demand, it may not come instantaneously the way I wanted and drank and took pills to get that enormous feeling of immense relief now, but it comes in its own time. And it has a whole unrelenting power of recovery with it. Recovery is progressive, joyously. And we recover in spite of ourselves, not because of ourselves. And God has done for me what I couldn't do for myself. The only things I've ever believed in my life, of course, were pills and booze. If we'd ever met, the first thing I'd say was, let's have a drink. I would tell you to take pills or whatever. And so I worked for the pharmaceutical industry. I couldn't work for that industry sober. I just couldn't. It's hard to care about the 5th brand of tetracycline when you're sober. It just doesn't have a lot of oomph to it, especially when it's enormously overpriced and you're beginning to feel squirmy about it. So for a long time, I couldn't work where I wanted to work and have access to what I felt was my equity, my financial equity, live at the level I wanted. So for many years, I didn't earn the kind of money I earned when I drank. And that was a humiliating experience for me. But I learned that I wasn't my money, that I wasn't my job title. I sold pre-Columbian replicas. I did a lot of crazy things for a couple of years. The people got tired of me. And I lost a lot of jobs sober, which was a thing to find yourself. You're not the most desirable employee, people feel. I wasn't some spiritual giant around the office. And those things taught me humility. And one year, in 1976, I began working for you people. You remember, this was the guy who didn't want to go to AA coffee shops and have AA cookies with AA people. Suddenly I was an AA employee. So you have to be careful what you hate. It gets back at you. And it's been the best blessing of my life. I've been there 14 years this summer, And I've met people like Dottie and Bill and Marianne and a lot of people in this room I've been at the General Service Conference with. And AA is the other passion in my life. You know, Joseph Campbell says you've got to follow your bliss. I'll just point out to you that that's what's been true for me. When I believed in chemistry, I followed my bliss into that field. And now I feel the bliss of abstinence and spirituality. And every year I get more into that field. You know, the only limitations on what can happen in our lives is our own imagination. And we have enormously proven program from increasing and focusing our imagination toward powerful goals. That's been my experience and the experience with other people. I have an enormous amount of faith in AA. I come from a city where a lot of people are dying of AIDS, a lot of people in our fellowship. You know, I've sponsored 2 men that died within the same week of AIDS, one Tuesday and one the following Tuesday. And one I sponsored 8 years, the other I sponsored almost 6 years. And I watched them die on a daily basis, die physically, but grow spiritually on a daily basis and have that kind of life. Every one of them have always asked me about my day, have been interested in me. You know, and this is a person, I didn't have the emotional stamina to be present to my own suffering. You know, and if we had met before I found AA and the tools of this program, I couldn't do anything about your suffering. I would have to run from it. Because if I don't own my own suffering, I don't have anything for you and yours except to cheer you out of it. You know, be the class clown was the way I was, that persona. You can always tell the person most in pain, they're always the class clown. Because it's a compensatory mechanism in my case because I couldn't deal with my own intrinsic separation and suffering. And the program's given me a tool for doing that. You know, a vehicle for changing. First of all, owning my own suffering in the 4th step and 5th step. And getting in touch with the fact that I can't do anything about my own suffering today, but experience it and see the usefulness of it in making me present to you. Because if my suffering isn't making me closer to you, it's useless, it's pointless. And that's what I always thought about suffering. I thought my mother's suffering had no redemptive quality to it. Any suffering, I thought if you were suffering, you were not only suffering, but you were stupid for not doing something about it. So you got a double dose of whatever it was. You know, you're supposed to know what to do about it. Now I think the answer is in the suffering. You know, I often am very conscious of the fact that, you know, our message is to carry this program to the suffering alcoholic. I used to believe that was the brand new alcoholic, you know, the new person, that we had to get more people into the tent. But I've now been around long enough, and I watch my fellows in AA long enough to know that the suffering alcoholic can have 7 years sobriety, 17 years, 27 years, or whatever. The person next to you can be the most suffering person in this room. You know, it would be spiritually arrogant for me to believe that because I'm sober today, I'll always be sober. You know, the steps aren't about physical sobriety, they're about emotional sobriety. And I can be drunk emotionally today if I'm not careful and if I'm not aware of my own, conscious of my own needs and my own losses or sufferings or whatever. And I can't be much use to you. The program gives me a place to do that, to get in touch with me and to understand that. And a little word about the traditions. I'm the archivist, and just a word about, I love it. Carl Sandburg wrote, whenever society or civilization perishes, there is always one condition present. They forgot where they came from. I think that's true for me personally. If I don't hear my own story and remember where I'm come from, you know, the fact that I had to have massive amounts of alcohol to even have a shot at comfortability, I need a massive amount of a known spiritual program to be comfortable today. I can't get sober and happy on a meeting or two a week, you know, because I didn't stay drunk on a drink or two a week. You know, I didn't have a glass of wine. I went at it. And I really believe we have to have the same consciousness within AA. We have to get at it. If AA is like a bus, If you hang on the edge of it, you're going to fall off after a block or two. Little hands are going to get tired, and you're going to fall off. You got to get in the bus. You have to go wherever the bus is going and look out the window and watch. It's AA is like an ant farm for me. There's always something going on. There's always somebody's having some kind of psychic or physical disturbance in their life. And when I'm in that frame of mind, I can be happy and useful to other people. I can notice that people maybe aren't in the rooms, and they need to be called and asked where they are. And maybe sometimes I can get out of my own head and decide what might be up for them. Anyway, we need the traditions for our collective emotional sobriety. And what's going to teach us about that is our pain. Along with success for the alcoholic, either personally or collectively, comes pain. We used to need each other when we were small. But now the meetings come big. If I don't get along here, I can go down the street and get another meeting. We have an enormous capacity and choice of abundance. We don't have to get along as much with each other the way we once did. We don't have to make the kind of sacrifices I heard when the panel of delegates talked about the early years in AA. When Ruth was the only woman out of 39 men and one woman in the fellowship. And they all told Ruth that, well, let Ruth do it. She has nothing else to do. And she did it. She made that kind of sacrifice. And I have to remind myself to stay in that kind of consciousness, that God's got to call me today. Just end with a prayer. When Lois Wilson died, Arthur Caliandro said that Lois, he didn't know her very well, but he encapsulated her life in a short period of time. And he said that she lived within three prayers. There are three prayers we can have. God help me, and every alcoholic knows that prayer. God help me. And then the second level of prayer is God give me. And finally, where Lois, he said, lived most of her life is God use me. And she lived most of her life in that prayer, that God used her. And I hope that's true for all of us. Thanks for listening and your patience.
Thank you, Frank. You liked him, didn't you? Yeah. Frank, I want to give you a little token of our appreciation, all in gold.